Hi, welcome back to EduBit. In our last video, we looked at topic 1 of the making of America, which was America's expansion, and today we have made topic 2, which is the West, ranging from 1839 to 1860. So before we get started, here's your key, as in the last video. Highlighted in red are the second order concepts. Now there aren't as many in this video as the other one, but there are quite a few which are worth remembering. Highlighted in yellow are your exam tips, but again there aren't as many in this video as in the last video, but there will be in later videos. So the first subtopic in the Western topic is the lives and culture of the Plains Indians, including the Lakota Sioux, which you would have done a case study on in your lessons, I'd imagine. Now the Plains was just a plot of land in America, very vast and dangerous and barren, and a lot of people thought it was inhabitable before the 1840s. It lies between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains, so east and west. There were very few resources and very extreme temperatures, which made it so uninhabitable and dangerous. And at this time, during the 1840s, most people saw the Great Plains as just this really big, dry, dangerous desert, which no money could be made from, so there's no point bothering with it. That was the sort of ideology. Now, one group of people who did try and adapt their way of living to suit the hostile environment on the plains was called the Lakota Sioux. They were very experienced with horses. In 1830, they'd obtained guns from white people, which were really helpful when hunting buffalo. Soon, the homelands of the plains filled up with other tribes who had escaped white expansion in the east. And by 1830, the plains were the official home of the Lakota Sioux because they had shifted their culture in a way that best suited them to live on the plains. Second subtopic is the journey of early migrants to California and Oregon and the Mormon settlement of Utah. So from the 1840s, a large number of people began moving westwards. Most people went across the plains to do this, and we'll look at why they did this, why they wanted to move westward in the next slide. But not many people had tried to do this before 1838, and hundreds of thousands of white people had moved to the west between 1839 and 1860, and most travelled to the far west in California, Oregon, and Washington. Again, we'll look at the details in the later slides. So the reasons why people went to to California, Oregon, and Utah varied. Some were pulling factors, and some were pushing factors. So pulling factors are where the benefits of moving to California, Oregon, and Utah are really good, and pushing factors are the factors which make the current homeland of those people so harsh they have to move away. So in 1837, the banking system collapsed. So people had no money and they had no jobs. That pushed them away from their area and made them want to move to California and Oregon. There was also a lot of competition between eastern farmers because land was being filled up in the east, which again was another push factor away from their land. Going into the pull factors, a lot of explorers had plotted safer routes into the west, so it wasn't the worst idea to travel along the west to get to these new places, which was a pull factor. In 1848, California was taken from Mexico in a war, that should say. This meant there was more land, more opportunity, more room for growth. Again, another pull factor. This key point here, manifest destiny, was this Christian ideology that it's a white person's right to take over land. That was another pull factor into these new settlements. On a side note, there were also advertising campaigns which enticed people to want to move to these areas. So the journeys to California and Oregon were very long and dangerous. For starters, Families had to decide which company of travellers they wanted to go with and what type of equipment they would need, how much it would cost, stuff like that. A lot of families travelled with guns in case of Indian attacks, but ironically, more of them were killed by having a gun in the first place than them being killed by actual Indian attacks. Now, the first part of the journey to the west was supposedly easy, but the wagons often got stuck, people died from cholera, which you'll see in your people's health topic, and the wagons only went 20 miles a day, which wasn't very convenient in terms of efficiency. Wagons were taken through rivers on the Rocky Mountains, but if you were late and you got there in the autumn, you'd have to stay on the plains, because if you're trying to go through the Rocky Mountains in the winter, then you've got no hope. But staying on the plains, again, was so dangerous. So either way, a lot of people died on this trail. The final leg was a lot easier because the Indians helped ferry travellers to these new lands, which is very helpful of them. Now, the Mormon settlement in Utah was very different to the other settlement in California and Oregon. This is mainly because the Mormon church was organized a lot differently. They tried to settle in the West and they wanted to practice their religion and polygamy freely. Polygamy just means the ability to have multiple partners at the same time. The Mormon leader chose Salt Lake City, which is an important place you need to know about, to build a new settlement. This city had irrigation ditches, so farming could happen as soon as possible, which was a massive pull factor into Salt Lake City. The Mormon church decided land ownership. No one could own water, which is a bit weird. But that's another reason why the Mormon settlement was a lot different to the other migrants to California and Oregon. And in the middle of the Salt Lake City, a Mormon temple was built. So there was a lot of clashing cultures, which meant that the Mormon settlement had to be further away from California and Oregon. So here's a kind of timeline showing you the nature and impacts of the California gold rush and the consequences of the Pike Peaks gold rush. As you can see, you've got your second order concepts, impact and consequence. So it's worth paying attention to this subtopic. So in terms of the gold rushes, gold was discovered in California in 1848, which meant there was a rush of settlers trying to get to California because of the amount of money that could be made there. In January, gold was discovered. I should say gold, not gold there. In February, Mexico sold California to the USA, so it was under US property. They could do whatever they liked with it. Following that, 1849 was the California Gold Rush. You may have heard of the 49ers. Those were the people who travelled over to California to try and build their wealth through gold. In October, California applied to be a state, and in 1850, Chinese miners went to California to be rich. Well, Chinese and other miners went to California to be rich. The mining settlements in California were very rough and violent places. It's mainly because they were male-dominated with a lot of gambling and in the saloons. Saloons were like Western pubs for cowboys. So a lot of violence, drinking, gambling, all of that stuff. The miners would force the Indian tribes off of their land to make space for their mining settlements, which meant there was a lot of conflict and tension. There was a lot of murder, robbery, crime, anything really you can think of. Women would come to these settlements as prostitutes or to wash clothes for men, so not really much of a future for women in these settlements. It's mainly male dominated. The thing about the gold rush is that not a lot of people actually became very wealthy from it. It was the small businesses who supported the gold rush. who made their wealth from it. In 1852, some businesses paid for the equipment, including the crushing mills needed to mine the gold. You may have heard of Levi Strauss. He was a businessman who created jeans called Levi's, which you probably know of. These are very tough wearing, durable, basically a miner's dream pair of jeans, and he was able to profit from this need by making clothing which supported the miners. The California gold rush had a huge impact on the West, the plains, and the people who lived there. The Californian Indians were pushed off of their land, and a new law was introduced which allowed Indians to be sold. That's how gold rush affected Indians in California. It also affected immigrants in the West, as they were seen as non-US miners, therefore meaning they had to pay a tax, and many were forced to leave because of this. The Plains Indians, the Lakota Sioux that we looked at before, they wanted a new treaty called the Fort Laramie Treaty, and this was signed in 1851. This meant that white miners could not destroy Californian hunting grounds for mining, so that was a benefit for them, for the Indians. It also affected America as a whole because California became a free state, and as we looked at in the first video, we talked about the Missouri Compromise and the issues with the balance of power. But with California becoming a free state, the balance of power was disrupted. Also, a demand for railroads increased, which we'll talk more about in later videos. So this slide is about the Pike Peaks Gold Rush, which was from 1858 to 1859. It started the settlement on the Great Plains, therefore war seemed inevitable. This is a really important second order concept, consequences. Talking about war as a consequence is a very versatile topic to talk about in your exams. You can easily fit it into many different exam questions, so it's just a good little thing to talk about in terms of getting the highest grades. So gold was discovered in 1858, as we've seen, or gold in Pikes Peak was discovered in 1858. But the thing about this land was that it was already occupied by the Cheyenne Indians. So that's the first kind of teaser at a potential war with this rising conflicts. 100,000 people came to Pikes Peak. People began settling in Kansas, which is in the plains, and this proved that the plains were not just barren desert, which later triggered homesteaders, the Homesteaders Act, which we'll again look at in later videos. But a consequence of all of this, the gold being discovered, people settling in land that wasn't theirs, was a war which broke out between the US and the Indians in 1860. You don't need to know the name of this war or much about it, you just need to know that a consequence of gold being discovered in Pikes Peak was tension, conflict, and war. And that's it for this video. That's all of the West covered, so 13 minutes, not that much content. Next video will be topic 3. But make sure you check out the Quizlet decks that I've made for the making of America. Soon we're going to be uploading videos about the Norman Conquest, public health, people's health, and Nazi Germany, so stay tuned for those if you are interested.